here. If you allow me to start the webinar. Уважаемые участники, мы рады всех вас видеть сегодня на сегодняшнем вебинаре от Chapter Zero Казахстан совместно с INSEAD. У нас здесь присутствуют представители как раз и нашей организации Chapter Zero Казахстан, и от INSEAD профессор Людо Ван и Татьяна Лебедева. Получается, сегодняшний полностью вебинар будет проходить на английском языке, поэтому я прошу вас ознакомиться с инструкцией, которая выслана в чате, как подключиться к синхронному переводу. И параллельно вы можете просто нажать на глобус и выбрать русский язык, если вам это будет удобно. All right, we start then. So my name is Sabit Mukanov. I'm the CEO of Chapter Zero Kazakhstan, and we welcome everyone on today's webinar. So first, I would love to give the floor to Karlagash Imanbayeva, the founder of Chapter Zero Kazakhstan. Dear Karlagash, the floor is yours.
Recording in progress.
Карлагаш, нас слышно, да?
Сейчас слышно, да, у меня связь пропала.
Okay. So dear colleagues, once again, welcome everyone. My name is Sabit Mukanov. I'm the CEO of Chapter Zero Kazakhstan. To begin with, I would love to express a big thank you for everyone joining the conference today. And also to dear Professor Ludo, I wanted to say a big thank you for all your support. You've been with us since the day one, and we're really grateful for that. To be honest, back in March, this collaboration was just an idea, something we hoped to create. And now, after months of careful preparation, we are really proud to launch this INSEAD Chapter Zero Kazakhstan joint program. This is a big step for us, and it will help us learn more about corporate governance, climate action, and how businesses can make a positive impact. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us, and I'll give the floor to Karlagash Imanbayeva, our founder of Chapter Zero Kazakhstan.
Спасибо, Сабит. Добрый вечер, уважаемые участники. Меня зовут Карлгаш Иманбаева. Я представляю Chapter Zero Казахстан. Я очень рада приветствовать всех нас на нашем сегодняшнем вебинаре. Сегодняшнее мероприятие посвящено официальному запуску нашей новой совместной программы Chapter Zero Казахстан и бизнес-школы INSEAD. Эта программа нацелена на обучение членов Совета Директоров, независимых директоров, первых руководителей, владельцев бизнеса в Казахстане и Центральной Азии. Идея этой программы, она проста, но амбициозна. Мы хотим не только поделиться новыми знаниями, повысить уровень знаний и компетенции в корпоративном управлении, но и помочь создать здесь, в нашем регионе, сообщество лидеров, которые также будут чувствовать уверенно и на глобальной бизнес-арене. Я сама являюсь выпускником INSEAD, и я закончила Executive MBA в 2019 году, получила сертификат корпоративного управления в 2020. И я прекрасно понимаю, что обучение в этой школе меняет восприятие управления, лидерства. Для меня лично INSEAD – это не просто университет, это место, где мировые знания и лучшие управленческие практики становятся доступными. Мой опыт работы, работая в таких странах, как Сингапур, Хьюстон, Париж, я увидела, насколько ценные навыки и подходы помогают компаниям расти, особенно когда речь идет об устойчивом развитии и достижении климатических целей. И важной частью данного опыта это было осознание того, насколько важно корпоративное управление в достижении климатических целей. И мы все прекрасно сегодня понимаем, сегодня в условиях глобальных климатических вызовов, включая обязательства Казахстана по Парижскому соглашению, корпоративное управление играет ключевую роль в обеспечении устойчивости компании. Казахстан обладает огромным природным потенциалом, и для того, чтобы был такой эффективный переход к устойчивой экономике, необходимо изменять и управление на всех уровнях. Эта программа, которую мы сегодня представляем совместно с INSEAD, это не просто очередной образовательный курс, в ее основе уникальные знания и международный опыт. Но при этом мы разработали также локальный модуль, который больше фокусируется на климатическом управлении и адаптирован под требования Climate Governance Initiative в сотрудничестве с Всемирным экономическим форумом. Это поможет участникам программы понять, как применять глобальные стандарты в условиях Казахстана и Центральной Азии. И для меня, я считаю, что, на мой взгляд, действительно это уникальная возможность. Во-первых, обучение будет проходить под руководством ведущих мировых экспертов, таких как профессор Людо Ван из INSEAD. Он настоящий эксперт корпоративного управления, я его представлю более детально позже. Во-вторых, это не просто теория, это участники получат инструменты, которые смогут применить уже на следующий день прямо в своей работе. Особенно важно, что мы уделим внимание адаптации этих знаний к местным условиям. Наши компании, особенно государственные и квазигосударственные, сталкиваются с уникальным вызовом, и программа поможет найти ответы на многие из них. Я уверена, что каждый участник программы сможет не только значительно повысить свои навыки, но и внести ощутимый вклад на уровне своих компаний или бизнеса. Теперь я с удовольствием хочу представить вам нашего основного спикера, профессора Людо Ван. Профессор Ван – выдающийся академик, преподаватель, консультант в области менеджмента. Он занимает должность профессора корпоративного управления в INSEAD и является соруководителем программы. Ранее он исполнял обязанности сопредседателя INSEAD, а также занимал ключевые академические должности. Для меня это особенно значимо, поскольку профессор Людо был моим научным руководителем во время написания диплома по программе Executive MBA в INSEAD и преподавал курс по корпоративному управлению в программе International Directors Program. Это для меня были бесценные знания и опыт, который он щедро делился со своими студентами. Немного про его академическую карьеру. Его академическая карьера началась с обучения в университете католик де Лувен, где он получил инженерное образование со специализацией в прикладной математике в 1974 году. Далее он продолжил свое обучение в Ельском университете, где получил степень доктора наук в области административных наук в 1979 году. Это заложило основу для его будущей карьеры. Профессор Ван начал свою преподавательскую деятельность в Гарвардском университете в школе государственного управления имени Джона Кеннеди, где он работал с 1978 по 80-е годы. И затем он присоединился к школе организации и управления при Ельском университете, где преподавал 8 лет. В 1988 году он стал профессором INSEAD. С этих пор профессор Людо Ван работает в INSEAD. Он занимает на протяжении своей карьеры, специализировался на таких темах, как справедливые процессы управления, инновации, бизнес-моделей, корпоративное управление, лидерство. И кроме того, я хочу отметить его статья «Organigraphs Drawing How Companies Really Work», опубликованная в Harvard Business Review в соавторстве с Генри Минцбергом в 1999 году. Она представила новый визуальный инструмент органиграф, который помогает до сих пор менеджерам выявлять потенциальные возможности для улучшения работы компании. Сегодня профессор Ван также является членом наблюдательных и консультативных советов нескольких фондов. На самом деле мы очень гордимся тем, что сегодня имеем возможность услышать его взгляд на важные аспекты корпоративного управления и устойчивого развития, которые становятся все более актуальными и для Казахстана, и для региона в целом. Я уверена, что сегодняшний вебинар будет полезен для всех участников, и мы сможем извлечь ценные знания и идеи для применения в их практике. Профессор Ван, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carly Gash. It's been a pleasure. It's nice to live through one's students. This is how we got in touch in Abu Dhabi first, and then in Fontainebleau. And I still remember your thesis on the changing energy picture of Kazakhstan. And so I didn't expect that this would lead me to a webinar now and to get in touch and talk to people in Kazakhstan. First, let's say a little bit about INSEAD. INSEAD was actually built on a school to train European managers, as opposed to French managers or German managers or Belgian or Spanish. I cannot say British after Brexit, but also British managers. And this is very important, which is INSEAD is one of the schools where everybody, including Carly Gash, you know, is at home. So the INSEAD is like a little bit United Nations of business schools, or the World College, the World Business School, if you wish. We actually have a title called, you know, Business School for the World. And I think that Business School for the World has two parts, which is you need to think about the world. This is very important in climate change. I mean, the climate change is a world phenomena. It's not a local phenomena. I live in Switzerland, and it's hard to see the glaciers melting. I can see the peasants being, the farmers being worried about staying in the mountain, because in the summer, we've had a summer where normally they come from the mountains with the cows around end of September, and 3 years ago they came home, if you wish, after August 15th, because there was no water for the cows, and you can't bring the water up, we know, with the helicopter. It's just too expensive. So climate change is a global phenomenon, but the action is local. And I think this is, the key issue, which is the solutions, of course, are global solutions, but there are also local solutions. And I think that is the duality that I would like to underline. You know, it's global thinking, but local action. And this, I think, is why I'm sort of always happy to also teach to local populations, as opposed to at INSEAD, where you have 1, 2, or 3 from one country, but you have the United Nations. But in order to understand the local culture, it's good to talk locally, and that's one of my interests with Kazakhstan. I also think that countries like Kazakhstan have a lot to offer, precisely because of their privileged position. And I'm not just referring to the oil, of course, which is in a certain way God, or you know, the great spirit in the sky, or the great hamster. Obviously loved Kazakhstan and put a lot of minerals. The great hamster also put a lot of mineral resources in Australia and in Texas and things like that. So you have a privileged position, but you also have a privileged position in the geopolitical world, and that, I think, makes it very interesting. And I think it's, in a certain way, the old world, you know, the old world needs to change. And I'm a strong believer that the new countries will bring more solutions and more energy in order to solve the problems of the world, whether they're energy or geopolitics. So that's my quick introduction. I have worked in many countries. Some is Abu Dhabi, the Emirates. I've worked, of course, in France. I've worked in the US. I've seen Belgium. So what I do want to say first is that every country has its own governance culture. That's very important. And I think what we're talking about is the duality between execution, which is getting things done, and governance, which is what needs to be done and how is it done. And it's more supervision. In a very, there are many ways to introduce governance. One, of course, is the OECD guidelines, you know, for state-owned enterprise or for non-state-owned enterprise. This is the global standard. That's the global thinking. But every country will apply it in its own way. And I think that's very important. And what I would like to certainly leave you with is that governance is not just an idea. It's also a spirit. It's a culture of responsibility. And I think, as we know, you know, execution is getting things done. But, you know, execution in English, in American especially, is a terrible word, because it's execution is like, you know, cutting heads. So what we're hopefully, instead of executing people, we are actually creating value, and we're creating values. And I think that's a much better word for business than execution. So I want to talk a little bit about governance, and I will stop here. Most of the problems are governance problems. Let me repeat that. If the world is not in a good place, I'm not talking about Kazakhstan specifically. But if the world is not in a good place, I'm talking about the war in Ukraine. I'm talking about climate change. I'm talking about, the elections in America. If the world, I'm talking about, of course, Israel. If the world is not in a good place, is because the governance is not good. That is the problem. And in business schools, we have taught way too much about execution, how to get things done. And I think the other side is the governance of getting things done, which is, what is the company about? What is the project? Is the company
Что за
a
компания,
virtuous
что
company?
за проект,
Is it
какая это
attracting good
компания,
talent, or is it actually
привлекает ли
more
компания хороших
dictatorial?
сотрудников,
All of
или
these
в
questions
этой
are
компании
fundamental
диктаторский
to
стиль
execution.
управления.
And the
Все эти
whole
вопросы
idea is
очень
that,
важны, они
and
непосредственно
I would
связаны с
stop
исполнением
here,
затем. И да,
Kaligash
хочу я
and
здесь уже
Sabit. The whole
остановиться и
idea
передать
is
слово
that
Карлгаше и Сабиту,
if
но хочу сказать
things do
следующее.
not work out
Идея в
well,
том,
it
если
is not
все
because
идет
people
не
don't
хорошо
execute,
или все идет
it's because
плохо,
people
это не потому
execute
что, не всегда
wrongly.
потому что люди
And
не,
that is a
не
governance issue.
исполняют.
So
Иногда
governance is
люди
central
исполняют, но
to
исполняют это
solving the
неправильно,
climate
потому что
equation. And
плохое
that's why I think
правление,
that's the
потому что
conversation
правление
that I think
неправильно
we want to
решило
start.
это уравнение или эту
So
задачу. И вот
sorry
с
for this
этого, наверное,
That's
мы
all
будем
right. I think
начинать.
you've already
Прошу
answered
прощения,
the
если
question,
много
to this
времени ушло
question
на
that
это.
we have
Все
here
отлично. Я
about the
думаю, вы уже
pillars of the
частично
corporate
ответили на
governance.
первый вопрос,
Should
который у
we
нас
move on
здесь
to
есть. И
the
вопрос связан с основными
No,
столпами
I'm just,
корпоративного
I think
управления.
it's good
Перейти ли
to
нам дальше?
maybe
Нет, 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 нет.
start again. So I don't
Очень
mind
хорошо,
if you
давайте
put the
мы
questions
начнем.
back up, or if you
Ничего
go to the
страшного,
question.
Well,
если мы
we've
именно
planned
этот
an
вопрос
interview session
разберем.
for today for you. We've got
Мы
several
планировали
questions.
такую сессию интервью
So
с вами. У нас есть
let's just start
несколько
one by
вопросов
one.
для вас.
So
Давайте
first
мы
question
начнем
would be,
и
what
по
would be the
очереди
key
пройдемся.
pillars of corporate
Первый
governance
вопрос.
according
Каковы
to INSEAD?
основные столпы корпоративного управления по
Yes,
версии
so the
INSEAD?
key pillars to corporate governance, I would say
Основные
there
столпы
are,
корпоративного
in a certain
управления,
way, I like to say there are
я бы
five
сказал,
pillars.
будут следующими. Я вообще люблю
But
говорить, что
let me
есть 5
start
основных
with
столпов.
the
Давайте я начну
normal pillars, and this is OECD. In a certain
с
way,
таких обычных
the
столпов, это
key
вот из
pillar
ОСР
is
взято.
actually the law.
Ключевой
Corporate governance
столб–
is
это,
about,
конечно,
it's about
законодательство.
the
Корпоративное
rights and
управление
responsibilities of
связано
corporations.
с правами,
And
обязанностями
so,
корпорации или
corporate
компании.
governance
Да?
is about ensuring that there is freedom
Корпоративное
of
управление
enterprise.
убедиться,
Okay?
что
So
есть
the
свобода для
freedom of
действий
enterprise,
компании.
meaning
Что это значит,
that
свобода для
the
компании,
government
свобода
or
деятельности? Это
wealthy
значит, что
people or
правительство
shareholders
или
cannot
акционеры,
capture
состоятельные люди не
cannot
смогут
capture the corporation for their
не
own good.
смогут, скажем так, быть в этой
And so the
корпорации
key
и
pillar
извлекать
is the
пользу
law,
только
which
для
basically
себя. Да? То
says
есть,
that
ключевой
the
столб
corporation
закона
is a
говорит о
legal
том,
person,
что
not a physical person,
корпорация–
but a
это
moral person.
юридическое лицо,
And
то есть
like
это
any
не
person
индивидуальное
in
лицо,
society, you
юридическое
want
лицо, и как
to make
любое
sure that the person
юридическое
acts
лицо
responsibly,
необходимо
which
убедиться,
basically
что все
means
люди, вовлеченные в
doesn't do
деятельность,
harm,
ведут себя ответственно, соответственно,
which
не
basically means does
приносят
good
вреда.
as opposed to bad.
Раз не приносят
And
вреда,
as
значит,
we
они должны
know, if we
приносить
look
пользу,
at
что-то хорошее.
climate change,
И если мы
for
посмотрим
example,
на
a
вопросы,
lot
связанные
of
с изменением
delay of
климата, мы
climate change
видим,
was done
что
by
очень
companies like
многое
ExxonMobil, who
было
were
сделано
trying
такими
to decline
компаниями,
the
как
science
ExxonMobil,
of
которые
climate change, which is
попытались,
that there is actually,
скажем так,
it's not just a blip, it's that overall, the temperature of the Earth is
которые
warming,
внесли свой
which
вклад
basically means that the sea level
во все эти
rise,
изменения,
most
да,
likely
и
that
там
the Gulf
произошли
Stream will turn
такие
around,
изменения,
that
как
it will
поднятие
go
уровня
from the
воды,
middle to the
и
north,
мы
that it
знаем,
could be that
многое
actually the
меняется в
Gulf
сфере
Stream,
природы.
which
Например,
actually warms Europe, could actually stop, which basically means that
специальные
Europe
потоки
could, for
воды
example,
будут
conceivably,
уже
and actually in the
теплыми.
next
И
20 to
это все
30
повлияет
years,
на
it
Европу.
could be that we
И
have a
это
weather
будет
reversal, which basically means the climate
таким
of Europe
образом,
would be more
что
similar, especially
мы
the north
понимаем,
of Europe,
климат,
to
меняется
Canada.
климат из-за
This,
этих
of course, would be a radical change to
изменений,
the
меняется
European
погода во
economy,
многих
and that is
странах.
climate change.
И мы понимаем, что где-то, может быть,
And
погода в Европе
companies
уже
like
будет такой, как в каких-то
ExxonMobil
других странах.
were
Такие
actually following
компании, как
course.
ExxonMobil, они
Idiots
Я бы назвал, может быть, их, ну, некоторых людей там идиотами, да, у них есть идеи, но не очень хорошие идеи, и это поведение неответственно. То есть у нас в обществе есть такие люди, которые врут или делают какие-то действия. И на самом деле вот был даже случай, когда компания ExxonMobil финансировала людей, чтобы они давали неправильную информацию, да, то есть опять-таки необходимо, чтобы компании вели себя соответственно, этично, и чтобы эти компании работали не против общества, а для общества. То есть, итак, первый столб – это закон. Вы должны работать в рамках закона. Второй момент – это дух. Используете ли вы общество для того, чтобы вы лично принесли, чтобы к вам пришли какие-то блага? Или, может быть, вы работаете так, чтобы эти блага были у сообщества? Хорошие компании улучшают жизнь граждан, жизнь общества. То есть второй столб – это будет создание ценностей, привнесение этой ценности. Ну и третий столб. Опять мы знаем, что мы сказали, что корпоративное управление – это делать что-то хорошее, а не делать плохое. То есть мы сказали добавить какую-то ценность и не навредить. Да? Мы не должны злоупотреблять рабочей силой своей, мы не должны врать как компания. Да? То есть если я говорю, мой автомобиль не загрязняет воздух, значит, как компания вы должны убедиться, что это действительно правда, а выпущенные вами автомобили не загрязняют воздух. И если мы вернемся опять к вопросу изменения климата, мы все будем согласны с тем, что в основном вот эти больший вклад в ухудшение климатической ситуации несут как раз-таки большие корпорации.
Of the corporations, making sure that corporations are responsible citizens as virtual people. So the first one was basically the law. The second one was the spirit. The third one is, I would say, the emotions, which is, do you care about people? Do you care about governance? And many people are actually don't care about corporate governance. They say, I want a salary. I want money. You know, I want a big car. I want a house. I want lots of people working for me. I want a high pay, you know. And so I think there will be no good corporate governance and there will be no progress on climate change if people do not care about the earth. That's very important. The earth, nobody cares enough about the earth. Everybody takes advantage of the earth. Agriculture, you know, the earth gives harvest, you know, all the time. You don't need to pay for the earth. It will give it, you know, the earth gives you sun, it gives you energy. So basically the earth is very generous. In a certain way, it doesn't care about us because it's a physical phenomenon, so there are no emotions in it. But the real question is, we cannot abuse it. And the answer of climate change is, the problem is we're abusing it, we're taking too much out of the earth, and we're not actually taking care of the earth. And that's why, you know, people now talk about sustainability, which is we want to sustain life on the planet. There is some nonsense in this. Some people say we need to save the planet. This is, of course, a joke. The planet will continue to live. The planet keeps arising. We don't have to worry about the planet. We have to worry about ourselves, which is, are we getting fried, as the Americans say? You know, are people in the Sahel, will they have a future? Spain might become a desert. I'm very interested in the view of Kazakhstan. I don't know enough, so I will not talk about this. So for me, there is the law, the physical, you know, constraints. There is the spirit, doing good. There is the emotion. I care about others. I'm not just there for, you know, taking and receiving. I'm also there to give. And then I think the fourth pillar is intelligence, which is you need to be smart. The solution to climate change will come from technology, from people's brains, and they will become smart, rational enough in order to stop doing bad. And I think in a democracy, the Greeks had this, and when the Greeks, I say the old Greeks, 2,000 years ago, you know, in Athens, which was the birthplace of democracy, you could only vote if you were educated. And I think that's not a bad idea, because there are some people like the Americans, they believe democracy is voting. But if people are starving, if people are hungry, if people are corruptible, voting doesn't mean anything. So you need the intelligence of understanding what society needs, what does the earth need, and also what do corporations do to each other, to society. And I think that for me is the fourth pillar. So these are some of the pillars of good governance. If you don't care about governance, it will not be good. If you don't have a positive spirit, it will not be good. If you don't understand the law, you will violate corporate governance. And finally, you must apply corporate governance for a good purpose. And now we come to the final equation. Why is this so important for companies? If you need equity and capital, then you need shareholders, to people who invest in the company. Now, if I'm an investor and Sabit, you're the CEO of a company called Chapter Zero, you say, I need money, I need to pay my employees, blah, 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 blah. And then I say, okay, here's $1 million. Of course, the key question is, will I get the money back? Will I get a profit, or will you just take the money? You know, and that finally is the final equation in corporate governance, which is it makes sure that actually the corporate governance is a fair actor. And so if I give you $1 million with interest, 10 years later, you will give you $1.5 million, you know? And what is the tool to get the $1.5 million back is corporate governance. And if you do not get 1.5 back, if you do not do what you promised in the contract, then I want to have a legal recourse. And that is where I come back to the first pillar, which is the law, which is the corporate governance should enforce contracts in the sense that, you know, contracts have to be fulfilled. And I think in that sense, corporate governance cannot just be by itself. It's always within a national culture. And there I have the bad news, which is some countries have a rotten governance culture. Not just a bad governance culture, but a rotten governance culture, because they all think life is about executing, you know, is about execution. And so that is, I think, where Kazakhstan, you know, could distinguish itself by actually becoming an example, becoming a light, and say, you know, we believe in corporate governance because this is good for the earth, this is good for investment, this is good for our citizens. And this actually means that people like corporate structures because they are responsible actors in society. So that's a little bit a long-winded answer. Maybe we can have some Q&A afterwards, but that would be my answer to the first one. You may be afraid to ask a second question now because you may think that I'm going to be too long.
No, don't worry. To be honest, the second question is the most interesting one, at least for Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
Dear Professor Ludо, as you've heard, we've got several state-owned enterprise here in Kazakhstan. So this is a majority, and most of them are basically stock companies. So in here, how would you specify the features and the opportunities and the limitations for the corporate governance within the state-owned enterprise? What would
yes so I mean, it's public knowledge, I can say it here. I am on the board of Naftogaz, which is the biggest state-owned enterprise in Ukraine. We actually give a lot of dividends to the state. We also give gas to relatively low-cost gas, you know, to the citizens of Ukraine, because this is a political decision by the government, which is a shareholder. And this is a fantastic question, because a government works for the people, you know, and by the people. Okay, fine. But the government has a choice, which is it can manage energy through the ministry or to ministerial agencies, or it can do it through a stock company. The advantage of a stock company is that you have less political maneuvering. Why? Because as soon as you have corporate enterprise, which may be owned by the state, owned by the people, as soon as you have a corporate enterprise or a stock company, that company has rights and responsibilities. And the rights and responsibilities are held by the board of directors. not by the state, not by the shareholder. And so this is something from my experience in Ukraine that is very hard for ministers and certainly I would say, you know, Soviet style managers to understand, which is that a corporation has rights and responsibilities. And so you cannot tell it as a shareholder what to do. So if I'm a shareholder in a company, Sabit, and you're the CEO, I cannot tell you what to do, which is I appoint board members that are responsible for the corporation and its relationship with the shareholders. And they will decide whether you're a good CEO or not, which is in corporate governance, it's the board that appoints the CEO, not the government. Why? Because the government might be tempted to appoint friends, might be tempted to appoint political appointees, not necessarily the best CEO. And as you know, Sabit, the CEO is one of the most important people in an organization. If you have a bad CEO, nothing will happen in the company. You know, it's a disaster. So checking the quality of the CEO, supervising the CEO, saying, Sabit, I'm sorry, you know, we need another CEO because your skills are not the skills that are needed for the future. All of that are decisions that are made by the board of directors. So capitalism, liberal or democratic capitalism, is built on three kinds of people. The shareholders could be the government, the board of directors responsible for the corporation, and then all of those that actually are impacted and do things. These are called the stakeholders. Shareholders are stakeholders, but employees, executives are stakeholders too, because in a liberal economy, of course, there are no slavers. So, you know, everything is decided by choice. And so the quality of the CEO in a company is one of the key concerns of the board of directors. And that should not be my friends, my son, my daughter, my grandmother, you know, whatever. It should be, what is the CEO who is the best capable of bringing this corporation to the future the way we envisage it.
So what you're saying is that the CEOs should be appointed not by the government, by the board of directors. And
yes.
What would you do in the case when the board of directors or the members of the board of directors are employed at the government? So what would be
that? That is called conflict of interest. That is called dual loyalty, which is that you have a loyalty to your job, and which is I want to do what the government says. That is what you should do when you're a ministerial appointment. But if you're on the board of directors, then your first duty is the corporation. So I had a discussion with the Minister of Energy, who basically said, I should appoint the CEO of Naftogaz. And I said, no, because if you're going to appoint the CEO, you're going to appoint somebody who necessarily will be your friend, maybe from the same political party, blah, 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 blah. And this will not be necessarily in the interest of yes, but I have the power, you know. I said, no, you don't have the power because the board of directors has the power. Oh, then I need to be chairman of the board of directors. And that is actually not so good. But that is a typical conflict of interest, which you can only solve if you understand the limits of corporate governance. And that corporate governance is not there to please the minister. Corporate governance is there to actually create the best company that, you know, it can be. And that is the role of the board of directors.
Thank you for the thorough answer. I think we've definitely answered it completely so far.
But by the way, what you're just saying is not a Kazakh problem. Huh? It's not a Ukrainian problem. It's a French problem. It's a Trump problem, you know, which is people like to appoint their friends, and the friends are not necessarily the best people to be boards of directors.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear that we're not the only ones that are experiencing it. So, and the next question is kind of broad. So, and also it aligns with the mission and the objectives of Chapter 0 Kazakhstan. So, Professor Ludo, could you please answer the question, how do climate goals impact the corporate governance, and what's the current trend?
Yes. So I think first, I think there is one missing equation in climate change, which is a single corporation cannot solve the climate change. So climate change must be solved at the industrial level. All the oil companies together should in a country or should in the world come together and say, how do we as an industry deal with climate change? Okay. Because we don't want the politicians to come in, because then they will be emotional. They will say oil is good or oil is bad. And the answer is oil is neither good or bad. It depends how you use it. Okay. So, of course, it used to be that the air was free, which is you could pollute without costs. And who would actually suffer from this? And the answer is the people, the communities, etc. So corporate governance is very much about making sure corporations do not harm, do not pollute. A great example in oil is, for example, leaded gasoline. I don't know what the state is in. I don't think Kazakhstan allows leaded gasoline, but leaded gasoline was very dangerous because you had lead in the gasoline, and this was hurting people and children especially. And so the way this was solved is by an interdiction on lead in gasoline. That is the way to solve climate change, which is you need to have agreements, not at the level of the corporation, but at the level of the industry, which is how do we consider making a contribution? Because if you compete, then you're driven to win. And if regulation forbids you to use what allows you to win, then you're going to cheat. You're going to try to take advantage. We know this in bicycling. If you take some chemicals, if you take doping, or in athletics in the Olympics, if you can get doping, then actually you can win. It's more easy to win. So there's always a temptation to cheat, and that is also what corporate governance and climate change. But I think I will go directly to chapter 0. Chapter 0 should not be a constraint on a single company in Kazakhstan. It should actually be a constraint on the whole energy industry in Kazakhstan, which is how are we collectively responsible so that competition occurs without doping, without cheating. And that is very different than corporate governance. It's called industrial governance or industrial sector governance. So governance has many different kind of declining. You have corporate governance, you have industrial governance, you have climate governance, you have global governance, you have geopolitical governance. So governance is always there. Corporate governance is just one application of governance. And I think what I'm saying is climate change is not just about corporate governance, it's also about industry governance. And it's about the laws of Kazakhstan, which is what do we, the people of Kazakhstan, allow companies to do, or what do we allow companies not to do?
Yeah, that was actually my point. I was about to ask you about the government action and the law and legislation in climate change, but you've answered that. And also,
no, I think for me, I think legislation is fundamental. That's why I said the first pillar is the law. You cannot actually force people to compete and then not have regulations like anti-doping. So I would say the government is much more responsible for the regulation and the law than it is for running companies, because by and large, most people agree that private companies, which is companies that are not held by the state, but companies that are held by private individuals, who have an interest, that private companies are more efficient and more effective than publicly owned companies. That is, and why? Because people want to work for their own company. People want to work for a company that they can taste, that they can touch, that they can associate with. And for example, I've been living in France for a lot of time, or in England, you have the same thing, which is publicly funded hospitals are less efficient than private hospitals. The problem with private hospitals is they're too expensive. So they're hospitals for the rich and not necessarily for other people. So these are questions that the government has to solve. So to finish, the government is much better to govern, to be a governor, than to execute. Execution should be left to companies. But the government, once it decides on a joint stock company, that joint stock company doesn't belong to the government anymore. It belongs to the shareholder. It has a lot of stakeholders, etc. And that is something that governments don't quite understand.
Thank you very much, Professor Van der Heijden. So
Yeah.
we're moving here to the next question about the corporate governance implementation within an organization. So basically, could you describe the process, please?
Yes, the corporate governance starts with a charter, a corporate charter, which is not what is the law in Kazakhstan, but if I have a company, you know, let me call it Astana Oil and Gas, you know, what is the corporate charter, which is what is the mission of the company? What are the values we abide by, including the values towards the earth, towards the community, and what are the governance rules of the game? So the most important is to build a charter which defines how do we think and what is our commitment to corporate governance. The second thing is how do we decline it, which is how do we make sure that the employees follow the rules. For example, in Naftogaz, we regularly have accidents, and yet we have safety rules. And yet people die because they don't follow the rules, you know, and then there are accidents. And then there's an explosion. And the answer is people don't follow the rules. Corporate governance is the same thing at the level of a corporation. A corporation can go bankrupt. That's like an explosion. And that is because the corporate governance was not well applied. So I think you have to write a charter. You have to agree. And then you have to educate people. Education is key. You have to educate people. What is my responsibility as a corporate governance employee, for example? What is my responsibility as a shareholder? And that is what, you know, we've been starting to do at INSEAD after the financial crisis, which is we started to educate executives, board members, shareholders into corporate governance, which is what is it? How do you decline it? And why does it create better companies, more sustainable companies? So corporate governance is like vitamin C for companies, which is, you know, the more vitamin C you have, you know, the healthier you will be, the longer you will live, the less you will have cancer and suffer from cancer. So corporate governance is a little bit like having vitamin C for the corporation. Simple, I was always surprised by the early answers and still answers I have today from executives who come to INSEAD. And the question is, why should you have corporate governance? And you know, the typical answer is because we have to, because it's the law. No, I'm saying you always have to follow the law. But why is the law a good law? And the answer is because if corporate governance is good, the chances that your boss is a good person, is a good manager, is higher. If you have good corporate governance, the chances that the company will not go bankrupt is much higher. If you have good corporate governance, the company is a more reliable business partner, you know, to customers or to. By and large, if you have good corporate governance, the chances that you will be fired for the wrong reasons is much less. So in that sense, corporate governance ensures that everybody benefits, but everybody benefits fairly and not excessively. And of course, if you're in the mafia, like in Italy or in Sicily, then what do we know about Sicily? It is the part of Italy that is actually the least healthy. Why? Because the mafia runs Sicily for themselves. And what is the result? Poverty, no investment, no jobs, you know, blah, 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 blah. And so that is good execution. People are executed or they have a gun to their head, but it's not good governance. And the answer is the people suffer.
But still, as far as I know, it's really tourist touristically attracted place.
Yes, no, that is fair. Which is Sicily, but Sicily is an amazing country because you have all civilizations on that country, and the tourism is still good. But there are very few companies on that island, except for hotels and transportation. Yeah, that is correct.
Well, thank you very much. I guess our interview is almost over, and we've got a little bit of time to.
Yeah, let's have a few questions, maybe.
Well, that would be good. To be honest, I've read the chat. I haven't found any questions in the chat. Maybe if our participants would be willing to answer some question about the corporate governance before we move to the next topic. Уважаемые участники, если у вас есть пару вопросов к профессору Людо Ван, сейчас самое время задать по корпоративному управлению, потому что далее мы перейдем в как раз-таки тематику самого курса, который мы запускаем совместно с INSEAD. Да, вопросы можно задавать на любом языке, на русском, либо на английском языке. Если что, мы переведем. Well, I don't see many hands raised, to be honest. But I guess
I will then tell maybe to finish and to make the subject a bit concrete, because corporate governance is a bit abstract. It's a little bit like mathematics, or it's not very conceptual. I come from Antwerp. Antwerp, you may know, is in Belgium. It's a big harbor. It was the big harbor for the development of Europe after World War II. So Antwerp became very rich because of the harbor. Both my parents were children of family firms, so firms that were created by my grandfathers. One firm got sold, liquidated, because it was almost bankrupt, and the other one went bankrupt. What do I realize now? Both bankruptcies were because of bad governance, not because of bad execution. It was actually bad governance. And I think that motivates me to sort of teach about it, because companies can die because of bad governance. Some people drink too much. That is not good for you. That is a governance problem. It is not. Execution is how many drinks can I have per night? Many. I'm executing well. I'm drinking. At some point, somebody should say, Ludo, stop drinking. That is governance. And basically, both companies went bankrupt because the son of the grandfather or the sons of the grandfather were not as good as the grandfather. And nobody came to my grandfather and said, maybe you should appoint somebody else, because your sons, they will take the money, they will start making decisions, and they may not be good for the corporation. And that's actually happened. So the reason I'm teaching governance is partly because I could not be the third generation. If I had been the third generation, I would have been managing this wood import business in the harbor of Antwerp. And to illustrate what is bad governance, my father went to Congo, Belgian Congo, Zaire now, Democratic Republic of Congo, and he actually bought a load of wood, and when the wood arrived in the boat in Antwerp, it was rotten. And what he had forgotten was to take insurance. And so he had paid for the boat, and that boat then actually never actually arrived, but he could not sell the wood because it's very important in transport that the wood is actually a little bit moisty, otherwise it dries out too much. But if you put too much water in it, then it rots. And in this case, they had not cared for the wood. Ultimately, that was not an execution problem. That was a supervision problem. That was actually bad execution. And so that was the favor. Then he had a second boat that came from Eastern Europe, and he had paid for the boat, but for the wood, but the boat never arrived. So he lost two boats, and basically that was the end of the business. In the other business, basically my grandfather had a son and two daughters, and frankly, the two daughters were better than the son. If the two daughters if one of the two daughters had been CEO, it would have been okay. But so these are my dogs. Sorry for the interruption. So basically, it was a succession in the family. Basically, first, there was a problem of succession, which is it should have gone to the daughters and not to the son. And then it went from the son to the grandson. And basically, the grandsons were even worse. And that basically led to the firm being sold. So this is one of the key problems of success of governance is succession of the CEO. If we have a great CEO, will the next CEO be as good? And a great example of bad succession would be General Electric. You know GE, General Electric, Jack Welch. Jack Welch was a hero CEO, but actually the succession of Jack Welch was a disaster with Jeff Immelt. And basically GE became a very, very small company because Jack Welch appointed a successor who was not very good, and the board allowed this to do this, and this was not in the interest of the corporation, and that's sort of another example of bad governance. So bad governance can kill you. I think people in hospitals die because of bad governance. We know when we watch TV, soldiers die because of bad governance. So all of these problems, I think, have not been studied enough because everybody focus on execution, and not on, are the people who execute the right people? Do they have the right skills? Are they working for themselves, or are they working for the corporation? All of these are corporate governance topics. And it is a topic that only became a real topic after the global financial crisis. So the global financial crisis is 2008. So we're going to be 2020. We're now 2024. So governance is only 14 years old. So it's not a surprise, if you wish, that governance is emerging only now.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Van der Heyden. We've got just under 7 minutes for our last part.
Yeah.
So dear participants, the next slides are just for you. So we are really happy to announce that we are launching a joint program that's called Board Climate Journey, organized by Chapter Zero Kazakhstan and INSEAD. What you see here on this slide is that this entire educational program consists of several modules. So to begin with, we've got so the program will start in December, and we'll have some preparational online courses, which are tailored to the CGI's principles, and also we've got the INSEAD preparation courses at the beginning. The main international model will take place in Fontainebleau, France, next to Paris, at between 4th and 6th March. So there'll be 3 days in France, and there'll be also another day a month later after these dates, a local module offline here in Astana, and the second day will be the follow-up session. And here we also just wanted to note that Professor Van der Heyden has happily agreed to come back a month after this international model takes place to Astana and to help our participants with their insights. So it'll be like a follow-up session. And of course, by the end of the program, you will always get access to all the networks provided by INSEAD and Chapter Zero. If Professor Van der Heyden, if maybe you could say a few words about the module in Fontainebleau.
Yes, the model in Fontainebleau is about the fundamentals of governance. So the fundamentals is structuring governance. which is the corporate charter, you know, the mission of the firm, the values that are important. So this will be one day. The second day will be corporate governance is very much about discussions. This is what boards do. This is what the management teams do. And that would be the second one. And then finally, corporate governance is actually very much the activity of board members or directors, board of directors. So the third day will be more about what director can you be. We're going to do a simulation for a board and see how a board adds value or destroys value. I have some students who say, Professor, my board doesn't do very much. And I say, well, that's not the word, because that's not the worst, because I know some boards that destroy value. So the whole idea first is not to destroy value and then to create value. But board work is more like coaching in soccer, right? The coach in the soccer team doesn't make the goals. It's the players who make the goals. The players are the managers. So board work is really like coaching. And this is not so easy, because once you've been an executive, you like to do things. And the whole idea of governance is that you no longer do things, you govern those that do. And that a 3-day program, you know, relatively intense, is a good way to start thinking about it, to prepare. And then at the end of the module, we'll ask people, what do you do in your context? And by the way, a key governance challenge is in startup companies or in growing companies. And so everybody can do something about governance. And we will invite people to do something. And then a month later or 2 months later, we will discuss in Kazakhstan, what have you done? And then we will discuss, you know, some people will have created boards with fellow members on the program. Other people will have talked to their shareholders, etc. So governance is really about building communities. You're not alone. The CEO is very often alone. You know, the whole idea of a good board is you're not alone. You know, we care about you. You care about the company, we care about the company. And sometimes you have to protect executives from shareholders, including from state shareholders, not because they're crooks, but because they don't necessarily have the right idea of what the corporations could do. And so that's what we will do. And then we'll deal more into the climate change issue, which is how do you link climate change with corporate governance?
Thank you, Professor. There's also the next slide with the other two speakers of the course. Should we just skip this slide, or would you want to introduce them for later?
No. I think the two speakers are you know, people who what is good, I think, is one of the key words of diversity. One of the key words in governance is diversity. You want to have different viewpoints, and so the 3 teachers, you will have 3 different teachers, and you will hear their viewpoints. You know, one is Russian French. You know, another one will you know is from another background. So it's actually, what is nice about INSEAD is that you have a diversity of teachers, you have a diversity of approaches. And this links with the idea that every country, every person has strong views on what governance is. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but I think it's good to have different faculty members.
Very good. So there's also, maybe you could just say last words about the community that INSEAD provides. That there are different.
INSEAD is a very interesting community because it has 70,000 alumni, you know, which is official alumni. So it's a very powerful network, and it's probably the most international management network because you have INSEAD alumni in every country. You know, Carly is Kazakh, you know, but you have in every country you have alumni. So if you go to Harvard or if you go to Stanford or Chicago, most of your alumni will be Americans, or they will be a few Europeans, a few Asians, but it will be very much an American group. You know, they will be the mindset of Chicago or the mindset of Harvard. At INSEAD, we are more like the United Nations, which is everybody's a minority, and INSEAD belongs to you. So you don't have a single view. And this is very important because corporate governance is very related to the culture of authority. So if you have strong presidential regimes, for example, is France, you know, with the president, it's also the US, it's also the Ukraine. In all countries where there is strong presidential power, corporate governance has difficulty because the president likes to tell corporations what to do. And the whole idea of corporate governance is not to allow the president to say what corporations should do, which is corporations should do what is in their interest or what is in the interest of the founders. And so what is nice about INSEAD is you have this international community, and then I will let Carly, you know, and Tatiana speak about how coming to the program links you, gives you an opportunity to link with this international community, which is really unique.
Thank you once again. So coming up, concluding, so at the end of the program, all participants will receive the certificate by INSEAD and Chapter 0 Kazakhstan. And summing it up, so we'll have this international module in Fontainebleau in France. There'll be a local module in Astana and some preparation courses at the beginning. And of course, the communities networking at the end. And the entire educational program is set to be 12,900 euros. So that will be the cost of the educational program, the early bid one, until the 1st of December. Of course, if there are any groups, we could consider some discounts for group tickets. What's not included in this price is the accommodation in France and the flight tickets and the visa costs. Everything else should be covered in here. If you have any questions, we'll just be sending all the required information after this webinar to everyone who is interested.
We have 2 questions.
We have two, actually, Mr. Van der Heijden, we have 2 questions. One of them was, is it still a good recommendation to have at least 30% of independent directors within the board? So what do you think?
Yes, minimum. By the way, independent needs to be qualified. But basically, if you want to have people that are really taking care of the corporation, you can't have a private agenda. You can't have your own agenda. You cannot also have the agenda of the government. So independence are critical. I have been once the only independent in a family firm. The CEO was taking advantage of the firm because of his knowledge. And I basically said, I'm resigning because this guy is taking advantage. I was the only independent, so I didn't want to have a fight. Then the CEO asked me, why are you resigning? You can't do this. And I said, for 2 reasons. I've been an independent for too long, and I think you should have more than 1 out of 6 board members as independent. I actually said you should have a second one. I've asked you for a second one already for 4 years. You've never done it. By the way, 2 out of 6 is 30%. It's very uncomfortable to be the only independent on the board because all the responsibility, because you truly think of the corporation. So independence, I think, is key to good governance, but it's not independent of what is good for the corporation. It's actually very dependent on what's good for the corporation, but it's independent of what the shareholder wants, what the CEO wants, which is the key governance question is this good for the corporation? And I am independent of my own personal interest. So I need to be quite generous and I need to decenter myself and say, I am here for the corporation. I'm very dependent on my mission. My mission is to protect the corporation. And many stakeholders, they want something for the corporation. CEO wants a higher salary, suppliers want to have higher margins, a government wants more taxes. So everybody wants something from the corporation. So that is the corporation as a social institution. But the final question is, who protects the corporation from all these pressures? And the answer is the board of directors. And only the independent director will truly say what is good for the corporation, which is they will say, look, I don't need to be a board member. You don't have to agree with me. But if you take advantage of this company, then I am resigning. I am leaving. In many countries with many owners, you cannot do this because the owners will be very upset because you're resigning, because you are independent.
Thank you so much. And maybe just one more last question. Maybe you could just answer it with a few words. So there is a question from Timur: how to make a proper decision to balance the conflict of interest in state-owned enterprises with a sole shareholder within the boards with independent directors?
Yes, yes, very complicated question in practice. Not and you, I like the way you said it, which is you asked in a few words. You know, this is not easy to say. But the problem with the sole shareholder is the sole shareholder will tend to become dictatorial. They will say, I need this, I need that, you know. I mean, the biggest bank in Ukraine was Privatbank, you know, and the owner, basically well known, took 5 billion from the bank, you know, that, and they allowed this to be done. So that is a failure in corporate governance. This is a difficult question. I would say the way to do this is for the state to be very clear on what you want from the state-owned company. This is what I call the mission. To be very clear on the governance, which is I will appoint independent directors, and I expect the directors to follow the mission, but the way they understand the mission, not necessarily the way I understand the mission. So ask the owner, the state, to write down the mission, to say, do you believe in governance? Do you not believe in governance? By the way, if you don't believe in governance, don't accept to be as a director of the state-owned company, because you will just be a slave. You will just be somebody who executes the minister. I can say, having done interviews in Russia, no oligarch sits on the board of directors, because even in Russia, you have the law and you're worried about being attacked for the director. So the oligarchs are never on the board because being on the board is legal responsibility. So be very careful about people who do not want to be sitting on the board, or who basically feel that they have to sit on the board. You have to be independent, and that is a tough debate. So the question is very difficult. Please come to the course.
That's a proper answer to wrap up our entire webinar. Well, thank you very much for everyone who has participated today. We've sent the important information about the course that we're launching with INSEAD in the chat. Please complete the form so that we'll get in touch with you. Thank you once again, Professor Van der Heijden, dear Tatiana, dear Karligash, for your time and all your support you've given us for the past 8 months.
Thank you, Sabit, and thank you to the participants. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Ludо Van der Heijden, for joining us today and for sharing your invaluable insights. And thank you once again to all the participants today. And I hope that you'll sign up to the program and you'll have the opportunity to collaborate with Professor Ludо Van der Heijden in the future. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sabit.
Thank you.